There we go. Excellent.
Okay.
And without further ado, again, thank you all panelists for joining us today. And we'll go ahead and start right in on our discussion. So our first question for our panelists is going to capture just this big, broad overview of what they do and why they do it. So for each of you, would you please briefly introduce yourself? And we are asking, what is your role and why do you do what you do? So Dontarie, if you would be so kind to start us off.
Hello, everyone. Hope you all are doing well today. My name is Dontarie Stallings. I'm an associate teaching professor at the University of California, San Diego. What I do is a little bit different. My background is in science policy, focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's something that's a little bit different for someone who's in a chemistry and biochemistry department. So science policy is my jam. I love it. I love being able to better understand how to manage people inside scientific settings and how to create climates and cultures that give people opportunities to be both successful and also enjoy the experience, right? And so academia is definitely one of those spaces where that doesn't overlap. And so for the longest time, I was actually working in industry, and I was consulting and doing things like that with companies trying to change their diversity profiles and their climate profiles by creating policy specific to those organizations. So coming to University of California, San Diego, I got this awesome opportunity to try to do that here. And so within the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, that's what I'm doing. I teach multiple classes, but I also run a cohort program where I'm taking first gen and underrepresented students, and I'm bringing them into a learning community, and those students are taking the same class together for a couple of years. And right now we have like 100 students in 4 years of cohorts. And it's creating a community that, even though there's a population on our campus of 50,000 plus, if you count everyone here, they don't feel alone. And so it's like small little things like that that I've been working on at the university. I say that the biggest part of my role is being able to try to communicate the humanity of individuals with inside science in a way that makes people both respect your point of view, but also simultaneously try to nudge them to be better human beings. That's what I do.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dontarie. We really appreciate that. We will proceed to Darcy Gordon. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. And hi, everyone. I'm Darcy. I use the she series pronouns. And I'm an instructor of blended and online learning at MIT. And I'm actually joint appointed both in the biology department and the Office of Open Learning. And so that office kind of concerns itself writ large with educational efforts that are public facing. So this includes massive open online courses, boot camps, credentialing, outreach, as well as some other, that timer, it's okay. And I act as essentially a learning engineer, which for folks who maybe aren't familiar with the term, are really just, someone who creates educational experiences that are informed by the learning sciences and educational technology. So I get to use some of the great research that people in DBER are putting out to kind of inform the pedagogical decisions that I make. And my primary responsibilities really kind of revolve around working with faculty, staff, students, which is how I know our gracious host, Ming. And I work with them to design and manage our biology department's massive open online course catalog. So briefly, some of the tasks I get to do is like illustrating, animating, and editing all the educational media we do. I get to design and edit kind of course assessments. And I also scope and plan kind of the extent and coverage and organization of these courses as well. Another kind of big part of that role also involves the coordination of what's going on currently in our classrooms in the department. and with the courses we're offering to our worldwide learners. So there's this nice kind of back and forth feedback. And just briefly touching upon the question of why, my biology education really shaped me, not just, as a scientist, but also like as a person in the world. And I think, now more than ever, it's part of my responsibility as a scientist educator to be an advocate and an activist in terms of making quality education really broadly accessible.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Darcy. Really appreciate it. We'll pass it off to Ben Zwickl. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, yeah, my name is Ben Zwickl. I'm an associate professor in the School of Physics and Astronomy at RIT. Typically for me, that looks like teaching 2 to 3 classes each year. Often these are lab classes or lab lecture classes like electronics or optics or a computational physics class. Also, like a lot of academics, do service on different committees, and it's fun to do committee work that is kind of aligned with things I care about. So curriculum committee, right, has a big impact on what we do in the department education-wise. Graduate admissions committee and kind of how we're structuring our graduate program. Also, I've been on tenure review committees and faculty searches and things like that. Broadly in terms of the research I do, I've been very interested in how people develop expertise and how they transition from really being a student to a scientist or an engineer, like how they make that transition into being a professional, or how do people become experts. I remember feeling really on the outside of that community, especially as an undergraduate, even though I majored in science, in physics and math. I remember specifically, like in the summer before my senior year, doing some undergraduate research and thinking about all the theory courses I had taken, all the homework I'd done, and really feeling like I had no idea how someone actually does theoretical physics, And when I joined an experimental lab in my PhD work, I was shocked how many of the really useful skills were never rewarded in my undergraduate training. So I was doing things like building circuits. I was using screwdrivers to build stuff. I was designing parts and computer-aided design software for the machine shop. It was very much an apprenticeship model, and it showed me that there was this huge gap between all the things that I was being rewarded for as a student in the classroom and then the things I was needed to be successful as a scientist. And so that was the big motivation for my research. And now I focus on areas like graduate education, kind of emerging technology education like quantum technology and workforce development, and integrating computation into science and physics classes. So yeah, so that's a bit about what I do and kind of some of the things that motivate me for my work.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it. Logan, thank you for joining us today. Logan Jin.
Great, and thanks for having me. So I'm Logan Jen. I'm Assistant Director of STEM in the Sheridan Center for Teaching and Learning here at Brown. Broadly, my work focuses on educational development of graduate students and postdocs. So thinking about our future faculty members and our future instructors of courses, and kind of what we can do to support them in their graduate education around teaching and learning. I primarily, like I said, work with the graduate student and postdoc community, but our center kind of broadly serves the university around teaching and learning efforts, so faculty development as well. And we also have a tutoring and writing center housed within our broader Center for Teaching and Learning. With that, I essentially run our CERTL program here at Brown. So CERTL is Center for Integration of Research, Teaching and Learning, which again provides additional professional development and support for trainees and folks considering careers in broadly in academia and beyond. I also work with our teaching certificate programs and our teaching consultants program. So folks who are interested in teaching and learning and want to take kind of advanced coursework in teaching and learning can do that through our center. So I co-direct that and teach essentially a seminar on evidence-based teaching once a term. In addition to that, I'm trained as a discipline-based education researcher, so deeper in biology. That's kind of what led me to my current role, kind of thinking about ways in which we can improve the undergraduate and graduate education experience through evidence-based research and evidence that we have from the literature. So that's something that's really neat, where I get to kind of move research into practice in ways to kind of further develop folks from a lens of research literature that we know how learning works. So I'll leave it there, yeah, happy to answer further questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Logan. And now we will pass it off to Adriel Cruz. Thank you for joining us, Adriel.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Adriel Cruz. I am a professor at Sierra College, which is a community college over in Northern California. If you're familiar with the geography, it's roughly between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe. For me, I'm a teaching faculty. So at community colleges, we are not just teaching focus, we just mainly do teaching and service. So my primary responsibilities are running and developing classes. I specifically teach anatomy and physiology over at Sierra College, working with our pre-nursing and allied health students. And then, of course, I do have shared governance. I've also participated in committees and whatnot. In terms of my training, I also was trained in discipline-based education. I did biology education research. And as I transitioned from my graduate work into my current role, I like to say that I transitioned from being a practitioner of the research to a consumer of the research, and really kind of bringing that back to the community colleges. I've done several workshops, taking some of that research and kind of bringing that back to my faculty. So that way, because a lot of them are not familiar with the research and what's out there. And so I think one of the things that, in terms of why I chose the community colleges as opposed to maybe an R1 university, which would be like UC Davis here in California, or the CSU system, is mainly because of the student population that we have. We get a lot of students that we term non-traditional students. So I have a lot of working mothers, so single moms of two, working 40-hour plus jobs, and trying to help them, like, they would never have dreamed of going and becoming a student, and this is the opportunity to give them that opportunity. So I have those kinds of students, English as second language learners, etc. And yeah, so if you kind of want to know about more of that world, I'd be happy to answer questions further.
Excellent. Thank you, Adriel. And we will pass it off to Kara Baldwin. Thank you for joining us.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute for a second.
No problem.
You'd think we'd be good at Zoom at this point, but hello, I'm Kara Baldwin. I'm the Education and Community Engagement Coordinator at Cedar Creek Ecosystem Science Reserve. So Cedar Creek Ecosystem Science Reserve is a biological field station connected to the University of Minnesota. And so there are about 200 science experiments happening on site around the ecology and kind of that broader kind of field. We're often page like 62 on a textbook if you are familiar with Big Biodiversity Experiment and some of these other really big famous ecology experiments. So that's what's happening on site. And so my job and my kind of primary role is to take all the stuff that's happening in science and making it accessible to the public is the best way to think about that. And so I do a lot of different things. So I primarily, like a bulk of my position is in the K-12 space. So I'm working with school groups that are coming to visit me, or sometimes I go to the classrooms. Like this morning, I was in St. Paul, Minnesota, leading some programming for 3rd and 4th graders. And so I just kind of float between the different grades based on who's interested in programming and provide some education programming, trying to kind of translate that science back into specific learning goals and standards. So that's like the bulk of what I do, but I also organize formal or informal kind of learning opportunities for the public. So we have public lecture series on site that we try to do once a month that I organize. We have book clubs that I had to keep track of. We do bird hikes and other things in like the kind of environmental education space as well, to try to kind of continue to build that out. So I guess I do a lot of stuff. But why do I love what I do? I really love teaching and connecting with the students. And I really enjoy the creativity it takes to take something, some scientific paper or some scientific idea that's happening at Cedar Creek and translating that or making it into curriculum for activities, and then finding like interesting partners to work with and collaborating and creating new programs. So I love all of those pieces, and I get to do all of that in my current position. And I think we'll end it there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kara. I appreciate it. And thank you again to all our panelists.
Yeah, thank you. As you can tell, we have a wonderful, diverse, and just awesome group of panelists here today. And so now we have a second question for all of you. And to shake it up, we're going to start with Darcy this time. And we'd like to ask you, what are your favorite and least favorite aspects of your job? So Darcy, take it away.
Thanks. So I mentioned a bit about the kind of philosophical alignment of why I do what I do and how that lines up with what I do. But there's, also alignment in what I find interesting and enjoyable. I'm a creative person. I really pride myself on that, and I love to design. This, goes from, curating spaces I'm in to making handicrafts to coming up with new recipes. And so I'm able to kind of combine my love of making things with, my excitement about biology education. I mentioned I do a lot of media editing, and so that, of course, is a creative kind of pursuit. What Kara said about, distilling down research into something that's, easily digestible by people who aren't necessarily experts. I get to do that, and also in a very visual way, which is pretty fun. I also just value lifelong learning, and my job basically means I'm a perpetual student. There's always like new technology, new research, new pedagogical strategies to learn, and I get to kind of try those on for size. Something also, that I've heard a lot of people kind of reference is about collaboration. I get to work with really interesting, varied people, and that also kind of frees me up to pursue, interesting ideas or projects that kind of emerge from talking with one another. Some of the things I don't so much enjoy, like I was just mentioning, am a people person, and I really am also a talker. And so having most of my student interaction be through the computer and totally asynchronous, I can sometimes miss, those face-to-face interactions and like classroom teaching experiences. But, there are still kind of opportunities to get that. I, collaborated with a bunch of folks to lead the design of some micro-credentials, specifically an inclusive teaching one. And so that kind of meshed things I liked and maybe counteracted some things I didn't, because I'm able to offer it like in person at MIT, as well as, we've made the curriculum and the facilitation guides totally online and available on MIT's OpenCourseWare.
Cool. Thank you very much, Darcy. And onwards to Ben.
All right. So in terms of stuff that I like a lot, I just like working on problems in education. I think one reason, at least for a lot of the people I know in the field, it's like, you affect people on a very personal level with education. And so it just feels like, good. It feels like tangible, like you're making a difference. And so, I think that's always part of it. I also just think from an intellectual standpoint, it's fascinating, right? You got everything from the brain, which I wish I understood better, like cognition and perception. You've got thinking about individuals' performance. You've got communities. You've got technology. You've got the policy work like Dontarie is talking about. Right? It's just this big, like multi-scale, field that's very complex. And so, yeah, it's just fascinating, right? It's just a really fascinating, complex system. So I love the learning and the research that's part of that. I enjoy the mentoring and helping junior researchers. And then I think part of it is the classroom, right? I like being in the classroom. And I think there's a lot of really creative instructors out there who don't do research, but I definitely find a lot of ways to link the research I do to the classroom teaching I do. Even though I don't research my classroom, but still I see a lot of ways in which the research impacts classroom practice. And so that's just a lot of fun. And I think some of my least favorite pieces, some of the paperwork you have to do for like grants and financial stuff. As a culture, like physicists can be kind of snobby and not give kind of due respect, I think, to the education researchers and valuing what they do. But I would say my colleagues are personally quite supportive, but that culture varies a lot institution to institution, and even having a couple of lousy colleagues can make life less fun. There's definitely stress, like I'm not gonna lie, like it can be stressful just being a faculty member and trying to juggle the different demands and tenure processes and stuff. And it's easy to get overcommitted, right? Because you're kind of expected to kind of perform well in a lot of things. And so it's easy to kind of say yes to too much or to take on too much. And that probably is what makes the stress worse. And so, those are some of my least favorite parts, but overall it's good. I'm very grateful to be doing what I do. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ben. And onwards to Logan.
Yeah, in reflecting on this, I really agree with what Darcy said about relationships and collaboration. And I think that's what really fuels me and drives me kind of the most, and is one of my favorite things is, just getting to work with so many different people. I've, gotten the chance to, just to work with, so many wonderful graduate students, postdocs, faculty members here has just been, just been really rewarding. And another thing is that, no 2 days are necessarily the same in a role like this. So, some days I, might be doing some more administrative things like, developing our CERTL network kind of here at Brown and kind of, advancing some of those types of efforts. Other days I'm, preparing for, the teaching certificate program that we run, or actually, teaching in that kind of space. Then other days I might be planning for something like a summer institute. So we recently ran a Cure Institute here for faculty at Brown, looking to embed course-based undergraduate research into their courses. And that was, really rewarding and kind of successful to see things like that through, or, next semester they're going to implement those changes to their course. And then we can think about kind of evaluating that and kind of looking at kind of changes that, small changes that are happening kind of at the institutional level, and kind of getting to see those changes through. I'm relatively new here. This is going on my 3rd academic year, so I'm still kind of in very, very much a learning stage, and kind of getting to know the institution, getting to know how things function, which is just, as other folks alluded to, just a really kind of fun experience that, it's very a lot of learning and kind of that relationship building that's kind of integral to a position like this. I do, as I said, have a DBER background and trying to kind of get a little bit more of a footing in that, thinking about developing things like our teaching as research projects, which is part of the CERTL network, but things like getting to do a little bit more of that kind of boots on the ground research that I don't necessarily get to do in a staff position like this, but trying to find outlets and opportunities to do that is something that I'm potentially looking forward to as, an additional aspect kind of this position. So I will stop there, but thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Logan. Adriel?
I definitely want to just keep echoing that idea of like kind of relationships. And for me, it's the both with my colleagues. I'm very, very fortunate to have or be in a department with very, very collaborative and supportive colleagues. And then for me, it's also the students. I mean, one of my favorite days of the semester is always the first day, getting to meet 50 to 75 new faces, get to know who they are, why they're wanting to come in to take my class, and what their goals are. And so I definitely love kind of developing those relationships with my students and helping them to find their goals, especially as they encounter some of the obstacles that they may have, again, whether that's food insecurity, whether that's juggling work and family and whatnot. And that kind of leads into probably one of my least favorite aspects of my job, which is getting into those situations where a student is unfortunately just caught between a rock and a hard place. And it can be a little taxing. I think one of the stories that comes to mind is I had a student who did really well in my anatomy class, was taking me for physiology and wasn't doing so well. She said, "Hey, can I talk to you?" And then I ended up just needing to listen or having to listen to her. She just, her mom had cancer. And so having to be an ad hoc therapist right and then there. And I remember after she had left, I personally needed like 5 minutes to be like, whoa, I needed to process that. That's a lot of emotions. And that was one student that was willing and comfortable enough to share with me. And I always think about how many more students out there are going through that I can't reach, or I don't even know about, or I'm not aware about. And so I think there's sometimes it's kind of accepting my limitations as a teacher and understanding that I can only do so much. But then kind of transferring back down to my favorite part, was like, well, whatever I can do, I want to do. And, whatever I can do to help and, tell them, especially the community colleges. I think there's, having talked to some of my students, especially in pre-allied health, there's kind of this idea that if I can't make it the first time, I'll never make it, period. And so it's having to help instill that kind of growth mindset into a lot of these students, be like, it's okay. Hey, I didn't do so hot. My path was not straight ahead. I had to do a lot of zigs and zags, and I fell myself. So kind of helping those students. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Cool. Thank you for sharing, Adriel, and we'll ask you about those zigs and zags shortly in the next question. Onwards to Kara.
Yeah, so I'll say I have a lot of fun at my job. I get to be outside a good chunk of the time in gorgeous weather, or not so gorgeous weather, depending on the day. I get to be like the fun field trip, right? So like the students, K-12 students are coming out, and we just have a lot of fun. We get them out, we get them off trail, we explore, and we just learn about the natural world through all of that. So that's a really fun part of my job. I personally love that every day is a little bit different, and I always get something different. So it keeps me on my toes. It keeps me kind of constantly learning through kind of trial and error in our own teaching practice and pedagogy. I get a lot of flexibility in the activities. So we often tailor our field trips to what teachers need, but I have a lot of flexibility in how does that fit in with what we're doing at Cedar Creek. And so that's a really fun part of my job as well, is like thinking through and having that autonomy to really decide what I want to teach, how I want to teach it, and organize it in a way that's really fun for the students and teachers. I like working with multiple age groups. Like I said, I work K-12 and beyond. And so it's really fun to interact with all these different age groups, whether it's like a field tour for a bunch of master naturalists or master gardeners that are kind of retired and moving on to the next step of their lives, or like working with some third graders or fifth graders on some fun field trip stuff. I also love the collaborations that we have and are going. I love connecting with the scientists and collaborating about ways to interpret their research for the public. And I love learning more as well. So there's a lot I love about my job. And that's probably just scratching the surface of all the things I love. I will say my least favorite part of my job, as you can imagine, is I don't have a lot of time to do everything I want to do. So I am trained in disciplinary based education research, and I just don't have time to like put together any kind of like meaningful research agendas on the programming that I'm leading. I often see students once and that's it. So I don't get those long-term connections with students. And then this time of year, I really don't like the ticks or the mosquitoes. So those would be the least favorite things about my job at the moment.
Thank you. Okay, how are the ticks and mosquitoes for you, Dontarie?
I'm lucky in that in San Diego, so not that bad. I would say that people in San Diego have this perspective of weather that's completely skewed. They'll complain about things being hot and forget that they're in San Diego. It is quite hilarious. Anyways, things I love, almost everything. This job is different every single day. Karen and Logan both said this about the about the not having 2 days that are the same. This is true. I do not have 2 days that are the same, and it means that there's a level of excitement that I bring into work every single day because it's always going to be something refreshing, right? There's some hurdles, but for the most part, that I would also say that something that I love about my job is being able to be a mentor and help professionally with both undergraduate and graduate students. I'm on multiple committees for PhD committees and things of that ilk, being able to impart my experiences and try to help students, make choices that are more about their happiness versus more than choices that are about what is perceived as what they should do next. And that's a conversation that I think I have a lot with both graduate and undergraduate students. What I dislike, there's a lot of performative things that you'll find inside the university where they'll tell you that they're trying to accomplish something and it sounds awesome, and then you peel back the curtain and you see the emperor has no clothes on, right? And so that happens a lot, and being able to accept that as being just the nature of big business and not letting that affect my goals and aspirations on the campus, that part sometimes gets a little sticky. But let me jump back to what I like again, because what I like far outweighs what I don't like. There's an aspect of being able to create a professional portfolio that is unique, that speaks to my soul, and that if tomorrow I decide to adjust it, I can. There's the ability to essentially be my own boss, to be accountable to myself. There's a level of accountability that I have to the university writ large, but as long as I can carve what I'm trying to accomplish within that particular rubric, then my professional flexibility is immense, and I love that.
Thank you very much, Dontarie, and thank you all for sharing. As you can see, my slides are glitching a bit. It's on to the next question, so I'll pass on to Zach.
All right, great. Thank you all again. So hopefully our listeners have gotten a good perspective of the variety of different types of careers that our panelists are representing. And hopefully y'all have been able to hold on to some ideas, aspects of these roles that you can relate to, some things that you find interesting or compelling, and could perhaps even envision yourself obtaining that role or pursuing that role someday. So we're going to finish our interviews in this first half of our panel today by asking a bit of a professional development question. And for those who are interested in getting to where y'all are, the panelists, we'd like to ask, how did you get to where you are? Or what advice do you have for someone looking to walk a similar path? And we will start with Ben Zwickl this time.
All right, yeah, thanks. So I did a PhD in experimental physics, which seems a long ways from physics education research. Probably maybe year 2 or year 3. I was really strongly interested in education. There was a teacher certification program that I could take courses at for free. I had a fellowship that sort of meant that my PhD advisor couldn't quite say no to that. So I had some flexibility there. And I did 2 of those 6 courses to actually get certified to teach high school. And then I just kind of ran out of time and couldn't do it all. But like it really did confirm my interest. And so, when I hear about people that are running like teaching and learning centers and kind of offering opportunities for grad students and postdocs to engage, I think that can be, so meaningful and kind of give you a taste of what it might look like to kind of, move in a more teaching oriented direction or even an education research direction. And as I neared graduation, I was pretty sure I wasn't going to do experimental physics research. I liked aspects of it, but not enough to try to make a career of it. And so I was looking at like science policy, education research, anything in that space, anything where I could just get a foot in the door. I was emailing people that I only knew of because I'd seen them at conferences in hopes that they would reply to my email. And, you know, eventually, my PhD advisor met my future postdoc advisor at like a young faculty event. And they both were like, yeah, you know, I think my future postdoc advisor was like, hey, I'm looking for a graduate student who could start a postdoc doing education research related to experimental physics and labs. And my PhD advisor was like, yeah, I have a student graduating, but unfortunately he wants to do education. And so it worked out that you know, just through that network. I mean, my cold calling, you know, introduced myself to some people, but didn't get anywhere. Advice, I would say take your science courses seriously, even if you want to move into education. Like, you really can make use of the technical content knowledge. And there are ways to make good use of it if you're in like a science department, and maintain that love for the science. And there's just, you know, kind of have a lot of respect for the education research field. There's just so much stuff that is different from doing physics or probably biology, that it's like, it really is its own field. There really is a ton of theoretical background, you know, different methods. And so just having it takes a lot of humility to enter that space and kind of feel like a beginner again, and make beginner level mistakes and learn from it. So yeah, I'll stop there. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you so much, Ben. We'll pass it off to Logan.
Great. So yeah, so as a Center for Teaching and Learning, we're in the business essentially of professional development. So this is a really great question, and a question I think a lot about in my role. But so as I mentioned, I'm trained as a discipline-based education researcher in biology education. My research background focuses on students with disabilities pursuing STEM degrees. So both undergraduate and graduate students, and thinking about challenges and kind of unique obstacles and barriers that students with disabilities face. And so so I get to kind of experience the kind of the research end of education research in my PhD, and kind of wanted to make a transition to a more practical lens of that kind of in my current position, which I get to do, and kind of move that research into practice that I mentioned earlier. And I was kind of looking to do that as I was wrapping up my PhD, as you know, we published you know, wonderful research, but you know, kind of getting that in the hands of practitioners and folks, instructors, faculty members, et cetera, to kind of do something with that. And kind of a role in a Center for Teaching and Learning kind of serves in some ways that bridge from kind of research to practice. I had a chance to do some intern type work with Center for Teaching and Learning at Arizona State University when I was a graduate student, and that was kind of my first exposure, if you will, to this even as a field, and the education development was even a thing. And so that's kind of something that I would encourage folks, you know, if you have a Center for Teaching and Learning, to kind of take advantage, as Ben mentioned, of you know, some of those resources, those opportunities, those you know, certificates or things that might be available to you, just to get a glimpse into what it's like to work with the Center for Teaching and Learning, work in a Center for Teaching and Learning, and kind of what careers are possible kind of in this realm that you know, exists in spaces that you might not necessarily know kind of are on your campuses. So yeah, I'll leave it there, but yeah, just encourage folks to check out your Center for Teaching and Learning if you have one.
Great. Thank you, Logan. Adriel.
Yeah, so for me, I did my undergraduate at UC Davis in biochemistry and molecular biology. And as I was trying to figure out what my next steps were, what I wanted to do, I mean, I used to be pre-med. I wanted to become a doctor. And at some point in my undergraduate career, I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. And so when I started exploring teaching, you know, obviously I looked at K-12, which would have been a teaching credential and that kind of stuff. But I really liked still the college student population. And so when I looked at community colleges, at least here in California, it just requires a master's degree in the field, so in biology. And so as I started looking at graduate schools, and I was looking at where I ended up, which is Sac State, I found DBER, biology education. And so I was super excited because research for me was no longer the necessary evil, if you will, in order to just get the piece of paper so I could teach. I was like, oh, this is something I'm actually passionate about. I actually really do enjoy education research. So I was very fortunate to find that. But I think as important as that research was in terms of actually landing where I am in a community college, I was a graduate teaching assistant. I was a TA, not just my first year, but my entire time. So I was TAing the entire time I was there. In my last couple of years, when I was just writing up my thesis, I even started getting some part-time positions. There were some community colleges that were willing to give me equivalency. So they said, you know, you've taken 30 graduate units. It doesn't matter that you don't have your thesis done just yet. You have enough. Let's go ahead and give you a class part-time. So I was finishing up my thesis. I was teaching a couple of classes part-time, and which was a double-edged sword. I think my advisor was like, why is it taking you 4.5 years? What should have taken you 2 or 3? But at the same time, it gave me some really good experience that when I came to my interviews, I was like, hey, I'm not new to the classroom. I've got, along with my graduate research, I've been in the classroom at this community college. I've been a TA at Sac State. I even have some back when I was an undergrad. So if you're kind of thinking going into a more teaching intensive institution, definitely make sure that you build up that particular part of your CV, and then also emphasize that on your CV.
Great. Thank you so much, Adriel. And we'll pass it off to Kara.
Yeah, I feel like it's more than 2.5 minutes to walk through all of the changes in direction I've had in my lifetime. But I have a bachelor's degree in biology with a teacher certification, and so I have been a classroom teacher in other like former lives. But what I really found out that I loved through just a summer internship and undergraduate was the informal education. I was helping lead programs at a state park. So like the campfire programs and like guided hikes and all those kinds of things. And I just fell in love with that kind of informal ed space. And so I knew that like I wanted to do something in education, but I didn't know exactly what that looked like beyond. I wanted to be in these more kind of free form environments that allowed for a lot of flexibility and like, hey, if you find a bear track on the pathway, you can stop what you're doing and like let everybody take in the awe of how cool that is. And so that kind of drove the rest of my decision making in part. But I also found a partner and got married, and so I also was like following them around because I was the educator. I could do anything. I can teach anywhere, but they had a little less flexibility in terms of where we could live. So I was constantly kind of moving and reinventing myself, but always looking for those education experiences because that's what made me really happy. And I knew that was just a really good fit for who I was. And so eventually I realized to get kind of these long-term positions in the informal ed space, like year-round positions and not just seasonal, that I really needed a master's degree. So I pursued my master's degree online through Oregon State eCampus. So I have a master's of science in science education. And then was working at the same time I was doing that, I was working part-time at an environmental education learning center out of Milwaukee, the Urban Ecology Center, leading educational programs for school groups. And then we moved to Illinois and I had to reinvent myself and defend my thesis all in the same time. The month I moved was the month I defended my thesis. And so eventually I got, I found my PhD program through Illinois State University. If you want to get involved and do things like in the outreach space, I'd say look for those opportunities, get involved in education and outreach, try to get as many different experiences and styles of education as possible, just so you know what fits you the best. I learned that informal ed was my space, but it might not be yours. And so getting those experiences to know that direction, I think, is important. And I think grant writing, anything in the informal ed space requires a lot of grant writing to like help run your program. So getting some experience in that is also really helpful. I'm happy to expand more on my incredibly long journey, but that's just a small piece of it.
Sure. Thank you, Kara. Thank you for doing your best, and everybody for doing your best to give your summary of your professional journey in 2.5 minutes. It's not easy. Dontarie.
All right, so I'll begin with this. So my background, I have a PhD in chemistry, specifically bioinorganic chemistry. I went straight from working at, doing my graduate work to being a undergraduate professor at a primary undergraduate institution. And it's a curvy path. But I'll say this because I think there's a bigger platform that we can talk about of how you can approach this. The first aspect I would say is determine what's going to make you happy. Like, take a pause, sit down. This is not a one-day event. This is, not what's going to look professionally awesome on a sheet of paper, not what your parents, your friends, or anybody else says that will be an incredible outcome for you. What is going to be the experience that you have day to day that makes you happy, right? And professionally, what does it look like? Once you figure that out, go find 20 people that have that same job. Then look at their CVs and then work it backwards. How did they get to each one of the steps that they had to get to in order to have the job that they have right now? Oftentimes, for people of our ilk that have these non-traditional positions, it was multiple jobs that led us to this particular position. And trying to recreate that pathway is not always, it doesn't always make sense. Not for you. Your pathway is going to be a little bit different than my pathway. My pathway is going to be a little bit different from Kara's, right? But what you do after that is you then try to find commonalities and what those steps were. So, with Logan working at a Center for Teaching and Learning, if you look at each one of the positions at the Center of Teaching and Learning, you can see strategically all the steps that these people made. And this is across the whole entire nation of you take this position to get this position, to get this position, to get this position, right? Once you understand what those steps are, be better. Whatever that step was, your goal is to do that next step better than the person whose CV that you're looking at. And if you continually do that step by step, you'll end up in a place that makes you happy.
Excellent advice. Thank you, Dontarie. Appreciate it. And we will finish off our discussion, our panelist interviews, with Darcy.
Well, it's an honor to kind of maybe get in some of the last storytelling. So to reference, what Kara said, I was one of those children, that was brought to the woods and, kind of shown the natural world. And that really kind of awakened my awareness of myself as like an organism on this planet in this particular moment. And, my relationships to other living things now and in the past and in the future. So that really motivated me to pursue my, whole educational journey and graduate degrees in behavioral ecology. While I was doing my graduate work, I taught something around like 12 semesters. And as a TA, I got to lecture, I got to facilitate discussions, develop labs, write exams, and create outreach opportunities for younger students. And exposure to all those different sides and types of teaching and education really it made me realize that helping other young scientists have their aha moments was like way more rewarding than like having my own at the bench. And so because of that, I knew I wanted to go into an education-focused career. I was geographically kind of constrained, and so I was looking for postdoc opportunities in education in the Boston area, which is like a good place to be, if you're restricted anywhere. And that, brought me to MIT as a postdoc, and then, I stayed on now as a staff member. So, my advice for folks who are interested in pivoting to learning engineering or digital education or really any education-specific career from a more research-focused background is kind of finding like the intersection and the similarities between those two fields. So remember, that getting a PhD or really pursuing any kind of academic training is really much more than becoming the expert in your domain. You learn quickly, you manage projects, and those kinds of skills are really translatable, and you can use them, even, to learn technology and educational software that you had never had the experience with before. And kind of similar to what other folks were saying, you have the conceptual and the kind of procedural expertise that, guides you in doing research. And it's the same kind of thing in learning engineering. You have like the theoretical pedagogy and then the practical instructional experience. So if you feel like you're really strong in one and maybe less experienced in the other, seek out those complementary skills to really kind of build your skill set that makes you well-rounded. And last thing I will say is, speaking of these different professional development opportunities, our group at MIT Biology currently has an opening for a postdoc. So if you are interested in that, join my Zoom room or reach out later with interest or questions.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much,
Well,
Darcy.
yes, thank you very much to all of our panelists. So what we're now going to do is transition into our breakout room section. So I think we're going to abbreviate the breakout rooms a bit in the interest of time. So the plan is going to be, let's all plan on taking like a 3-minute break, and let's come back at like 3 minutes past the hour, at which point I will have 6 breakout rooms set up. And our plan is going to be to have 2 breakout sessions. So each of you can have more in-depth discussions with 2 of the 6 panelists, and you can each elect to join whichever room you want. So let's all go and take some water, take a break, and I will have the room set up by 3 minutes past the hour, and then you can all join a room and talk with one of the panelists in more detail. Thanks again to our panelists, and yeah, we'll join the room soon.